You're listening to a Roddenberry Podcast.
Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. We'll have more news this evening, but first...
The latest Gene-ology, a Roddenberry Podcast.
Episode 70, Dutchman's Reef. Welcome to Mission Log Gene-ology. I'm Ashley Thomas.
And I'm Earl Green.
Each week on Gene-ology, we're sent on a mission to find Gene Roddenberry's early TV writing, examining it for the kinds of morals, meanings, and messages that Gene included in his most famous work, Star Trek.
Before we get to trivia on this week's episode, let me take a brief moment to encourage you to join our Patreon or follow us on YouTube or leave a review wherever you're listening to us. Patreon is your gateway to all things Mission Log, including exclusive access to the unedited version of our show and our private Discord where you can interact with us, your hosts, during scheduled live chats along with occasional screenings. You can access all this for just $1 a month. So head over to patreon.com/missionlog to see what tier works for you and join the conversation.
By the way, reviews help our shows way more than you could possibly know. So even if you can't come up with the words for a written review, a 5-star rating goes a really long way to tell the algorithm that you like us, you think we're golden, and that other people might like us too. We're counting on our loyal genealogists to help us spread the word. And now, this week's trivia. Earl, what gold did you mine from that fancy new book that you read?
Well, there's quite a bit of it. I had to dig through some smoky quartz first, but worse things could happen. Dutchman's Reef was the 6th episode filmed, and at least in the UK, the 6th episode broadcast. It premiered on ATV London on October 15th, 1960, but wouldn't see its Australian premiere until April 15th, 1961. The American premiere date in syndication is lost to time, but it's probably somewhere in between those two. You ever wonder why the historical character of Freeman Cobb turned into the TV character of Chris Cobb? I found a book by Durham Groves that was positively loaded with Whiplash trivia. The book is called Australian Westerns in the 1950s, and it covers 3 shows in detail, Whiplash being one of them. As it turns out, another American TV production company had snapped up the rights to a series about Freeman Cobb shortly before going under. So while someone somewhere was still trying to legally assert their rights to Freeman Cobb's story, the frustrating thing is there was basically no chance that show would ever get made. Since Freeman Cobb is a historical figure and a public figure, names and some details were changed to protect the backsides of everyone making Whiplash. The only actor in Whiplash, aside from Peter Graves, who could claim to be a regular on the series, was Tony Wickert, a Sydney native with stage and local film experience, but no TV in his background. He starred as Dan Ledward, Cobb's sidekick, for most of the show's run, appearing in 25 episodes. In an interview in Australian Westerns in the 1950s, Wickert says he became friends with Graves partly due to the fact that production on the first few episodes was chaotic and they had a lot of downtime together on the set. Graves was described as a true professional and a calming influence on a lot of frayed nerves. ITC, the British company bankrolling the production of Whiplash, shut down production just before Christmas 1959 and didn't resume filming until March 1960. It was when production resumed that Tony Wickert joined the cast, replacing actor Ken Goodlett, who played an older and crankier stagecoach driver for Cobb and Company named Mike Jackie, hence Gene's original scripts including Mike as a character, but not Dan Ledward. This is also approximately when John Meredith Lucas was hired as the show's associate producer. Dutchman's Reef also deals with Australian Aboriginal culture, which was central to several episodes of Whiplash, though the local cast and crew were reportedly aghast at some of the inaccuracies in the script's portrayal of that culture. While some effort was made to cast the show authentically, it was perhaps inevitable at this point in the history of Australian TV production that some white actors were put into blackface, though at least in this script of Gene's, this is part of the plot. It is something the character is doing, not just the actor. Also part of the plot was a scene in which Cobb and Dan dodged spears being thrown in their direction. In rehearsals, the spears were, of course, thrown quite wide of the mark, but during filming, things actually got dangerous, with Tony Wickert injuring himself while dodging a spear that got dangerously close to hitting him. Filming Whiplash was at least as much of an adventure as watching Whiplash, and by the way, that take is what got left in the show. If you watch closely, you see Tony Wickert faceplant into that rock. And that's when he hurt himself. Now, no retakes. Stays in the show. Guest stars for Dutchman's Reef included actor Leonard Teal as Norton. Leonard had already gotten local TV and film credits under his belt prior to working on Whiplash, and would go on to appear in one more episode as a different character. He would go on to be a very familiar face on Australian TV, a regular in such series as The Hungry Ones and 7 Little Australians, but best known for a nearly 400-episode stint on the daytime soap Class of 74, and almost as many episodes of the primetime police series Homicide, on which Leonard was a regular for 11 years. We lost Leonard Teal in 1994. As Norton's mother, Mrs. Colbert, we have another familiar face on Australian TV, Queenie Ashton. British-born, she spent much of her career down under, with lengthy roles on such shows as Autumn Affair, A Country Practice, and Certain Women. But Queenie also appeared in series that were destined to be seen beyond Australia, putting in guest appearances on the 5th season premiere of The Love Boat and the horror anthology The Evil Touch. We lost her in 1999. Among the guest cast in a smaller role was Aboriginal actor Robert Tudawali, who made a total of 7 appearances as different characters in episodes of Whiplash, making him the show's most frequently recurring guest actor. Robert was a genuine Aboriginal elder and activist, having gained fame for his starring role in the 1955 film Jeddah, but it was his participation in Whiplash that demonstrated that Indigenous actors were treated in a way that could most charitably be described as separate but unequal. While Peter Graves and the other white cast members were put up in local hotels for location filming, Tony Wickert recalls that Robert Tudawali was given temporary accommodations on the studio lot. Robert died from burns suffered in a violent attack in 1967 at the age of 38. In the year prior to his death, he had served as the vice president of the Northern Territory Council for Aboriginal Rights. The Tudawali Indigenous Film and Television Awards, held since 1993, are named in his honor, and his own life story was itself turned into a 1987 TV movie, simply titled Tudawali.
That Dutchman's Reef story has been around for years.
Funny you getting so interested in it all of a sudden.
It's not that sudden. It came to mind back in Sydney when we were talking to old lady Colbert.
You think she knows about it?
I think that's exactly why Norton Colbert was sent out into this country, looking for it under her orders. He wasn't like the rest of his family. Teddy Bear Colbert, fat little man who wanted to be a musician, wore fancy velvet pants.
Men I knew joked about him a lot, if you know what I mean.
I felt sorry for him. He wanted to be liked, desperately. There just wasn't any place he could fit in.
You figure he could actually be out here somewhere?
No. I doubt if the Colberts really think so. They're gambling the story about a white man could be true. They wouldn't care what his name was. But to exist in this country, he'd have to know the terrain like a native. In fact, he'd have to live right with them in order to have waterhole rights. Which means he's certain to know where Dutchman's Reef is.
In the late 1850s, the Australian gold rush has brought American stage line operator Chris Cobb down under, establishing Australia's first stagecoach service, which brings him into contact with the local population and the adventures and danger inherent in the outback. Act 1. Chris Cobb and Dan Ledward are decked out in their finest as they arrive at the palatial home of the Colberts, one of the wealthiest families in Sydney, as Chris tells Dan, You don't get invited to the Colbert compound, you get summoned. Even the Colbert's butler looks at them in silent judgment, as if their finest finery just isn't fine enough. Cobb hands over his hat. Dan doesn't. The butler snatches it off his head anyway and abruptly leaves them in an anteroom while he announces their arrival. In the Colberts' sitting room, there is sitting going on. So much sitting. The Colberts are well-dressed, well-fed, and just obviously well-to-do. Mrs. Colbert holds court here with her daughter Edwina and her son Charles there as well. Edwina says, "This Cobb has a reputation for impertinence, mother," to which her mother replies, "He's a man." This is about when Cobb pushes the doorway curtains aside and lets himself and Dan in because he's done waiting while his betters gossip about him within earshot. Everyone's a little stunned at Cobb's impetuosity, but recovering quickly, Mrs. Colbert says, "Ah, of course, you're an American." The butler is sent to fetch a couple of chairs for the visitors. Mrs. Colbert has a job she'd like to pay Cobb to do for her. His mission, should he choose to accept it, is to find her missing older son, Norton, code name Teddy Bear. Okay, actually, it's not a code name, it's more of a nickname. Probably not even a nickname he likes. Cobb has met Norton before, but wasn't his body found in the outback a few years ago? Charles says that there was a body found wearing Norton's clothes, carrying Norton's papers, and that body was buried, but Mrs. Colbert interrupts. There are rumors that Norton is still alive, living with an indigenous tribe. Which is impossible, Edwina says. He wouldn't have any of the mod cons. He'd be living like an animal. Clutch those pearls. Cobb patiently reminds the Colberts that in his experience, human beings can endure almost anything if they have a good reason to. Charles blurts out that it's probably not the gold, which is a weird thing to bring up. Cobb wants to know why Mrs. Colbert wants him to look into this. He's not exactly an investigator, and if Mrs. Colbert was really trying to bring her son home, she could easily afford to have 1,000 men out looking for him, so what's the real deal here? She then lays it out. If Cobb can find Norton and bring him to her, he can pretty much write his own contract to haul cargo to and from the Colbert family's mining operation. Cobb agrees, throws a flirty little wink to Edwina, who goes from uptight to flustered in a second, and leaves with Dan in tow. Looks like they just became investigators. And who's the first person you grill when you're trying to find someone? Ask the bartender. He mentions that a tribe of indigenous men brought in a big quartz rock with gold embedded in it about a year ago, and not all of them necessarily looked indigenous. But he quickly reveals his own biases too, calling them hardly human, and hinting that he may have killed the man who tried to use the quartz as currency. Not a terribly useful or pleasant conversation, though he does give Cobb an idea of which direction to continue the search. The quartz and gold is rumored to be abundant in a formation called Dutchman's Reef, though people have gone looking for it without ever finding it, or in some cases without ever returning. Cobb and Dan ride out into rough desert country after topping off their canteens with water. That night around the campfire, Dan asks Cobb if he's taking the legend of Dutchman's Reef seriously. Cobb says he thinks Mrs. Colbert took it seriously enough to send her son out looking for it. Norton didn't fit in with either the family or the spoiled rich part of the city he was born into, and Cobb took pity on him and got him out of more than one scrape. As they reminisce about the Norton Colbert they knew, they're oblivious to the Aborigines closing in under cover of darkness until it's too late. The horses are stolen while they aren't looking, and when Cobb and Dan jump up to respond to that, another man emerges from the darkness and steals their canteens. The sun rises. The halftime score, Cobb and Dan have no horses and no water, and they're making their way on foot, in the desert under the sweltering sun. They keep traveling and stop again at night to rest, which is when the natives sneak in again and take their weapons this time. Big 0 on TripAdvisor, this one. Act 2. Daybreak in the outback. Cobb and Dan are defenseless, still have no water, and they're still on foot. Cobb has spotted a tribal watering hole about an hour away on foot, and even though Dan says water is the one thing that the tribe is guaranteed to fight them over, they have to chance it. Besides, it's their best chance to see if Norton is among them. Dan holds out some hope that if Norton is with the tribe, he might speak on their behalf, But Cobb says if Norton doesn't intervene for the two interlopers, this whole trek will end pretty quickly. They grab their gear and start walking. When they reach the watering hole, they find the entire Aboriginal tribe around it. Cobb and Dan drop their bags, and when Dan kneels down as if to dip a hand into the water, the entire tribe stands ready with their spears, including one man who does not look like the others, but does wear their tribal paint and garments. Dan tries to address the tribe to parley for water, but Cobb instead addresses one man directly, who he is certain is Norton Culbert. Cobb says that he and Dan were sent by Norton's mother to find him and bring him back. If Norton doesn't want to return with them, that's fine, but they do need water either way. The tribal leader responds, anyone stealing water will be subject to the custom of having 3 spears hurled at them. Cobb dips his hat into the water, handing it to Dan and telling him to drink. Norton throws a spear that narrowly misses them. The elder gives Norton 2 more spears to finish the job. Cobb tells Norton that up until now he was willing to leave and say nothing about Norton's presence, but that's off the table now that things are escalating. Norton says, do you think my family really wants me? Do you think I want them? Cobb and Dan break and run in different directions, with Norton chasing after Cobb. Cobb decides to taunt his pursuer and get him mad enough to start making mistakes, so he calls him Teddy Bear. The response is predictable. Another spear is thrown and misses, but Cobb keeps leading Norton away from the watering hole, talking the whole time, not really trying to hide. You remember that time a whole saloon full of guys was ready to beat you up, Norton? You remember who stopped them? But Norton has circled around and comes up from behind Cobb, spear at the ready. He's got the drop on Cobb, but then clumsily throws down his spear, which Cobb observes was the 3rd spear. Norton does remember him and remembers the incident. Norton signals the rest of the tribe to stand down and let Cobb and Dan drink. You don't have to tell Dan twice. He drops down at the water's edge and proceeds to insert his face. Cobb isn't far behind him. Crisis over. Hydrate. Hydrate. This also gives Cobb a chance to keep talking to Norton. It hasn't been easy for the pampered city mouse to join this tribe. There were times he thought he was a goner, but it was still better than dying a little bit inside every day that he was part of so-called civilization. While Norton and Cobb have their talk, Dan stumbles across another specimen like the one at the bar, quartz with gold embedded in it. They're rich. The rock formation around the watering hole is Dutchman's Reef. To say that the natives get restless at this find is an understatement. They know. They know that white men would tear this world down to get to the gold. Cobb strikes a deal with Norton. Cobb will leave his compass with Norton, while Norton will ensure that Cobb and Dan are escorted back to the edge of civilization by another member of the tribe. Cobb and Dan will return safely to their world, while Norton's world will be safe from the prying eyes of outsiders. It's agreed, and once handed the compass, Norton smashes it against the rocks and watches the 2 outsiders leave his tribe. Back in Sydney, Chris Cobb makes sure to dot the I's and cross the T's regarding the Cobb and Company contract with the Culberts, and Mrs. Culbert agrees to his terms. She just wants to know the truth about her son. Edwina and Charles seem eager as well, eager to hear that their brother isn't coming back, because if Norton doesn't return, his share of the family inheritance is split between his siblings. Cobb carefully words his findings. Teddy Bear is dead. Oh well, Mrs. Culbert says. Say, did you find any trace of Dutchman's Reef? Cobb smirks. So it was never really about bringing Norton back alive and safe. He tells Mrs. Culbert she needs to consider the legend of Dutchman's Reef to be a dead end, too. And with that, Cobb and Dan take their leave of the family. The end.
Amazing job on the recap, Earl. I believe you have successfully mined a story for our listeners to get if they don't have access to watch the episode. So thank you for that.
It was a process that involved watching the episode a couple of times and really drinking it all in.
Indeed. Don't want to be caught without your canteen while working on this one. So, I'm getting it out of the way. We got an episode where Chris and Dan are just wandering around the desert doing their thing. I'm like, dang it, I'm going to sound super, like, lecherous or whatever by the end of this, but I'm like, they are very handsome men. It is very distracting to me.
I thought it was funny that we had the whole thing where he winks at the daughter.
Oh, yeah. I'm like, uh-oh.
Yeah, and she's been kind of stuck up at that point, and then all of a sudden she's just like, oh.
Mr. Cobb, you are looking so makey-outy tonight.
Exactly. The funny thing is that wink is not in the script.
I remembered as you were recording the recap, I was like, oh, that's right, we have some scripts for this one. Okay. So the wink is not in the script. That's an ad-lib. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. Now, the script is not the final shooting script.
Okay.
There's lots of changes, and I'll get into that as we go, but feels like maybe that was a bit of business worked out between the director and the actors. But, it cost you nothing to do that, and it's just fun. And yes, apparently, even Edwina thinks that both of these guys look really makey-outy.
Yeah, they were definitely looking makey-outy tonight. So, relatedly, I cannot believe that Peter Graves can take off a giant 10-gallon hat and not nary a hair is out of place. I'm like, bro, how? Even when I had longer hair, I couldn't do that. I definitely can't do it now.
I don't have hair. I can't even do that now.
Hey, Earl, none of them are out of place.
Oh, you'd be surprised. Also, I just want to double check with you. Was I alone in thinking that Peter Graves was going to Riker that chair?
Hey, you know what? It didn't cross my mind, but the man's tall enough. He can Riker the chair if he wanted to.
Yeah, and it's funny because he's almost taller than that set. Like, he's almost about to faceplant in that chandelier.
Faceplant in a chandelier. That's a thing I will never be able to do. Unless the chandelier is already on the ground and I trip.
Yeah, it is not a thing that is in any danger of happening to me either. Okay, so the script draft that we have is not the final. There is not a date on it, unfortunately. But right at the beginning, there is already a deleted scene, which was obviously snipped out before filming. Because otherwise they would have been some really obvious continuity jump cuts in here. The butler says something about seeing if he can pawn Cobb and Dan off on the family secretary, to which Cobb replies by grabbing the butler's coat and saying, "You'll go directly to the family, my man. You'll tell them Mr. Cobb has taken time from a busy schedule at their request, that he is not accustomed to standing at the door, and you've asked him to wait in the parlor." Now, this would have happened between Cobb taking off his hat and Dan just unceremoniously having his hat removed. So the fact that there is no edit there means that that scene did not make it to the shooting script.
Yeah, and I could see why. That seems a little out of character for Chris. A little more forceful than we normally see him.
There is some other stuff on paper that is out of character for Chris, so it really makes me wonder if who smoothed off the rough edges here. Was it Gene? Was it John Meredith Lucas, who was actually working with the cast and crew on location? Because Lucas was also directing a pretty good number of the episodes. Someone somewhere kind of smoothed this out and decided who Cobb is, and I'm grateful for that, because some of the examples in this particular script are kind of odd. Another thing I noticed in watching the show while also looking at the script is that the scripts are formatted completely differently from the show. The scripts have a cold open and then credits and then acts 1 and 2. Basically, they're formatted like Wrangler scripts.
Right.
Which does make sense, as this would all have been written around the same time. Now, it is possible, because what I have is I have the UK DVD set. It's possible that Whiplash was re-edited for American consumption to fit that format, but considering that re-editing means paying someone to edit it a second time, I'm going to call that unlikely. I think it was edited once, and that's what everyone got. The beginning of the search for Norton is another thing that is very different in the script. There is a lot of extra material that did not make it to the shooting script, where they are basically asking the bartender questions, including language that made that character seem like even more of a racist jerk than what ended up on screen. And even what little made it to screen didn't exactly make him look like a prince among men.
And, maybe Earl, this could lend itself a little more to our discussion, but I feel kind of bad for Norton. The man's nickname is Teddy Bear, which is probably a bit emasculating.
Oh, yes.
It'd be one thing if it was Bear, but it's Teddy Bear. And the man wants to be a musician, whereas, we see his brother's like a, straight-laced businessman kind of deal. Apparently in this pub, people were making fun of him, putting him down. Also, he's not tall. He's like a little fat man. I'm like, all right. And his name's Teddy Bear, and he wants to be a musician. Apparently he's wearing velvet pants. Also, that's offensive, too.
Oh, I wonder if you're about to stumble across the thing that I think I stumbled upon.
Okay. And so, and Chris, he's like, it wasn't right for these people to put him down just because he's different. But also at the same time, it seems like there's pity. Like Chris pities him because he is different. There was kind of an offhand comment or whatever. And I missed writing down like the actual wording, but it seems like Chris doesn't really know what to do with this guy either. So I'd love to hear more of what you have stumbled across here, Earl, unless you'd rather save that for discussion.
Oh, that is a big part of my discussion notes, because there's a lot of ways to interpret that.
Yeah, that was kind of what I was thinking.
Some of which are kind of shocking for 1960 in a Western.
Right.
I think we may be thinking the same thing. And
yeah.
I'm sure everyone listening, or, a good number of people listening, are also kind of going, oh, right about now.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Nothing wrong with velvet pants, though. I mean, what's the phrase? There were only two men alive who could wear frilly shirts and steal your lady, and they were Prince and John Pertwee.
I would also argue you could add David Bowie to that list.
David Bowie could be wearing anything or nothing at all and steal your lady.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
No lie detected.
No lies detected. So, okay. All right. Well, we'll dig into that a little more in discussion then. So.
Oh, yeah. I have many things to say. This episode of Whiplash made me think lots of thoughts.
Yeah, I felt bad for him because even with Chris standing up for him or not thinking anything's wrong with him because he's different, you still get like this feeling that he pities him in some way, which it really honestly isn't that much better than what this man's family is doing.
Yeah, I don't think he wants pity. I think he wants acceptance.
Yeah,
which
respect.
I think is what we all want. And, that seems to be why he's hanging out with the tribe, is he has some dignity there.
Yeah.
They are not questioning anything. Going back to the differences between the script and the show, in the script, there's a lot of stuff at about this point in the story that's kind of like survival training course stuff. Like Cobb showing Dan how to find water inside the stems of any plants that they find growing out in the desert. First off, I think Dan, being local, would probably already know this stuff. But there's also a boomerang attack that did not make it into the show. But it is pointed out by Cobb, fortunately, it was not a killer boomerang.
Oh, I didn't know they came in killer and regular.
Yeah. One set to stun, one set to kill. Well, Cobb set one to kill in episode in Bathurst, so I guess he would know.
Yeah.
Okay, now speaking of edits, I was talking about earlier, there was a change in the scene that obviously was filmed with a different script than what we have, because there were no edits indicating that material had been filmed and dropped. In the opening scene of the second act, when they are getting ready to be on the move again, and Dan says he's thirsty, right after he says that, there is a really detectable edit. Like they went to a different take of the same scene with both guys standing there, but it's just enough of a jump cut that you notice it.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of wonder what happened there because there's really nothing missing in that part of the script.
Mm.
Now, in the scene where Cobb and Dan are trying to negotiate for access to the water, the script has some more deleted material, including one where Chris basically threatens he's going to call the cops on the tribe. He's going to bring out the constables. It's like, really, dude?
Bro.
It's, the man doesn't exactly have a cell phone in the 1850s. Now, fortunately, that did not make the final shooting script, which is good because it's kind of silly. Also a relief because this scene included a lot of pidgin English for the natives to say, which reminded me of far too much terrible dialogue written for Native Americans in more than a few westerns shot in the States. Some of it bordering uncomfortably on being really, really racist. Going back again to that Darren Groves book, one of the stories from the making of Whiplash is that particularly with John Meredith Lucas working with the production in Australia, scripts were frequently changed during filming to be more authentic to local color, place names, that sort of thing.
Sure.
And maybe, just maybe, a little bit less problematic. In the scene where Cobb and Norton discuss why Norton has never returned to Western civilization, the early script draft is very different. Norton says, "I began to like it," talking about his life with the tribe. "There's no good out here. There's no evil. You just try to stay alive. It's all very simple." Now contrast that with what actually got broadcast. Out here, life is simple. We share everything. Without that, nobody lives. I don't know about you. I think that is a huge improvement.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
The original dialogue has a little bit of appeal in kind of a no gods, no masters kind of way, but it's almost nihilistic.
Right.
The revised dialogue has a lot more hope to it. It's less dog-eat-dog and more like, here is a basic thing to keep in mind about being a good human. Regardless of whether your tribe is living off the land and nothing else, or whether you live in an urban area. Whoever did that rewrite, that helped quite a bit.
Right.
And my last note on differences between script and show is that there was a striking difference in that last scene with the Colbert family. In the early draft script, there is some unspoken subtext between Cobb and Mrs. Colbert that clues her in that Norton is still alive, but he's just never coming home. This offers her character a little bit more grace than the final version did, because it lets us sympathize with her a bit more.
Right.
Whereas what we got in the filmed broadcast episode makes her seem really mercenary and undeserving of the audience's sympathy. The original draft downplayed her interest in Dutchman's Reef, only kind of hinting at it, while adding the kind of shocking element of Chris Cobb telling Dan as they leave that, hey, we're going to go back out there someday and find that gold. Ah, boo.
No.
That reminds me too much of the ending of the Have Gun Will Travel episode, The Yuma Treasure, which Norm and I covered back in episode 31 of this podcast, which has Paladin making it back to civilization only because he agrees not to lead other white men back to the Yavapai gold. And then saying at the end, oh, I'll come back and find it someday and I'll retire on the proceeds. No. Strike that.
No.
I want my heroes to be people who can be trusted not to betray others. And, not people who will wait a little while and then betray others as a little snack.
As a treat. You said you think you and I are on the same page. So would you like to confirm?
Well, let's work toward that page.
Okay.
I have a lot of things to say about Norton. I mean, this whole discussion is going to be about Norton.
Yeah.
First off, good news is he has not gotten sick at any point living in the outback. So obviously, Norton antivirus installed successfully.
Oh man, where's my say my cojones over here? I don't have any symbols though. Okay, go ahead.
But that's kind of where the fun ends, because Norton just does not seem like he has had a happy life. The fact that his family has to try, they have to make an effort to call him anything other than Teddy Bear. This brings back memories of several other characters Gene has written. I'm thinking of Billy John and Polo from Wrangler.
Mm-hmm.
Characters who would like to be getting on with their lives, please and thank you, but they are surrounded by family members who are endlessly emasculating. See also Frank DeWitt in El Paso Stage. Well, he kind of gets emasculated to death.
Truly.
And see also the original formulation of Roy Carter in The Hanging of Roy Carter.
Yep.
This is starting to stick out as a recurring theme in Gene's work. And I try not to tie up too much podcast time attempting to speculate how any particular theme relates to Gene's personal life on a granular level, because here's the thing, I don't really know. But this is really starting to stick out as a recurring theme, and I don't know if we are seeing the tip of the iceberg of some daddy issues, or maybe more broadly family issues, no gender necessary. Without having more information, I'm not in a position to speculate from a place of being informed on that aspect of Gene's life. There are a few hints in his biography, but not enough for me to comfortably draw any major conclusions. But you can't deny the theme is there. It keeps showing up again and again. That's not even the most interesting thing happening in this script. I was about to say there's something in this script. There's a lot of things in this script that relate it to the present day in huge and kind of unexpected ways. Probably not intentional at the time, but they've gained relevance. It's the question of who Norton Culbert identifies as. Obviously, he doesn't want to be identified as Teddy Bear, and hey, I'm hip. As rapper names go, that's not a good choice. It's a nickname that robs him of any chance of being taken seriously as an adult, as a man, or just really being taken seriously full stop in any way. His family has saddled him with this, and they won't let him outgrow it. And he's undoubtedly sick of that, and also I think he is sick of the excesses of conspicuous wealth that the rest of his family seems to revel in. And so, yeah, he has pieced out on wealthy white society. Where he does find some peace and some fellowship is among an indigenous tribe, where he learns their ways, he immerses himself in and joins their culture. Does that make him one of them? Is he doing more harm than good by trying to be one of them? Could he potentially be doing his new family more good as an ally to interface that tribe with the white world? So it's kind of one question this raises is, what are the guardrails on the phrase, I identify as? Or is Norton engaging in a gigantic act of cultural appropriation here? But all of this is terribly important in 2025 when we're recording this, because the right to decide your identity, your true identity, to shift and reclaim your identity, if you've had some sort of epiphany and you've decided to be your true and authentic self, this is very much under attack right now, particularly in the area of gender identities. So Norton has decided he identifies more with the indigenous culture than with the European baggage his family's been carrying around the whole time. And when he has family members who are only interested in his welfare insofar as they care who gets his share of the inheritance, it's eager to see not only why he doesn't want to be Teddy Bear anymore, he doesn't even want to be a Culbert anymore. Yeah, he's ready to ditch it all. But given the extreme tension between Norton's chosen tribe and even friendly, well-meaning white men like Cobb, could Norton eventually grow into a role that allows him to advocate on behalf of his new family? And maybe not now. Maybe everything is still too raw and too recent. But in doing what he's done, he's carved out a unique position for himself, and one that could result in some major lasting change down the road. Now, I realize that's way outside the scope of this half-hour episode of a 1960 Western. And at this point, I'm basically outlining Whiplash fanfic that maybe nobody needs. I just wish Cobb could have perhaps said something encouraging this, planting the seed for it, not just in Norton's mind, but in the audience's mind as well. The fact that this doesn't happen in an episode featuring no less than Robert Tutawali seems like a major oversight. That's still not the most interesting thing happening here, though. I kind of want to drop a whole different major thing into the conversation and leave it for everyone listening to consider, because, again, we have a change of one line between script and show that contains an entire world of possibility. In the campfire scene, in both the script and the finished show, Cobb mentions about Norton. He wasn't like the rest of his family, Teddy Bear Colbert, fat little man who wanted to be a musician, wore fancy velvet pants. In the show as broadcast, Dan replies by saying, "Some men I knew joked about him a lot." That's not what the script says. In the script, which was written for the more rough-and-tumble character of Mike Jackie, and not Dan Ledward, the line reads as follows: "Men I knew joked about him a lot, if you know what I mean." Both the script and the show leave it at that, but I will tell you that this kind of wording was often as close as any show of this era could dare to get in hinting that someone might be something other than heterosexual. And if that's the case, that rewrites the whole DNA of the story. Yeah. Is this what you were picking up on?
Yes. I'm like, are they implying that either one, he is, because he's not choosing the traditional path, I guess, for men of his particular family of businessman in order to properly, run the family business or whatever, or that he's not a more rough and tumble frontiersman kind of guy like we see most of the men in this show. Are they implying that he is somehow less than a man, or not a manly man, or whatever? My other thought was, and the main reason they said it, and I'm guessing this is the stereotype here, but like, wants to be a musician and wears velvet pants. I'm like, one, I'm very pro soft pants. Am currently wearing soft pants. And soft pants for all. I don't care.
Yeah, I believe
just wear pants.
yeah, please just wear pants.
Just wear pants.
I think we have both stated our admiration for Thanksgiving pants on this very podcast.
These are my Thanksgiving pants.
Yeah, exactly. And, wants to be a musician, velvet pants. He wants to be Jimi Hendrix.
Yeah.
Goals, life goals.
Yeah.
Go for it, Norton. Now, I will say that perhaps none of this interpretation is supported by the fact that he is out there being quite possibly, more macho than anyone who thinks that they're rough and tumble. But I don't think it completely invalidates it either. No, absolutely not. Yeah, I was wondering, like, well, Gene wrote this. Gene's a progressive guy. Is Gene trying to imply that this guy is not straight? And I also wondered if this is another case where this is an element that was worked into a script that was not necessarily being approved by people in Hollywood. Remember, this was for a British production company. Right. Now, counterbalancing out my own argument, at this point in British history, homosexuality was illegal. I mean, it was straight up something that they would lock you up for.
Wow, I didn't know that.
So, perhaps not, but it just feels like we were trying to slip something under the door past a lot of the people who would be up in arms about that sort of thing. Like I said, this was as close as you could get to even hinting at it.
Sure.
And a lot of it is left up to the viewer to catch their meaning. But I still feel like those few extra words at the end of that line those say a lot. I feel like the real intention for the character of Norton Culbert lies in that deleted half of a line of dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that men I knew joked about him a lot, if you know what I mean. Without the second half of that line, that statement gets a little bit neutered, but you still picked up on it because I believe you have not been looking at the scripts, you've been looking at the show.
Right. Yeah, and that was just from
the show.
Just from watching the show. Yeah.
Yeah. With that extra few words, I feel like there is a much clearer implication about this character. And again, a Western in 1960, that is astounding.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely did not see that coming. You know, Earl, even a different reading on that, even without the implication, because I think you could watch the show and not think, oh, well, this guy is probably gay. Like, you know, you could do that. But at the same time, even if you didn't interpret it that way, you've still got this pushback on the masculinity script.
Yes.
What's wrong with this guy wanting to be a musician or to be something other than rough and tumble cowboy or a businessman or a banker or a doctor or something like that? What's wrong with him wanting to pursue art? How is that somehow a lesser pursuit?
Yeah, and the more bothersome aspect of that is how did we get to this point when the first episode we reviewed had this whole spiel about we don't want to resolve this with guns because all of a sudden every man in town is going to be wearing a gun on his hip.
Right.
Can we extend that beyond a specific style of weapon and extend it to masculinity at all? Which kind of goes back to what I was saying during our Wrangler coverage, specifically with Wavelin. Why is the defining trait of masculinity throwing punches, hurting people, leaving bruises? Why does it have to be that way? And why are we... Because even in the dialogue that our sympathetic characters have, you know, Cobb is sympathetic to Norton, but he still pities him like, oh, you know, it's a pity he couldn't be a manly man like me. There's still plenty of manly men in the world. We're not going to miss one more. Why can you not carve out some space for this guy to be who he truly wants to be?
There's something that just occurred to me, Earl, and I don't know how common the term might have been then, or if it was even used at all. But if I'm given to understand correctly, there's a certain segment of gay men who would describe themselves as bear.
Yes.
Because of how they are built.
Yes.
Is that something they're trying to get at with this nickname?
It almost seems like too much of a coincidence, doesn't it?
I mean, I would need to, you know, this is not something I know anything really about, but it just occurred to me. It's like, oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, no, it is a term that exists. I'm aware of the term.
Yeah. So somebody with much more knowledge in that, please feel free to weigh in, because I don't know how early that term has come into use or if that's a more modern term, but at least with 2025 eyes, that's how you could read it. Yeah.
So whatever problematic elements exist on kind of the racial end of the original draft script, it seems like this was baked into the cake from the beginning. This was all there in Gene's original draft. So again, really bold thing to even drop little hints and then dance around for 1960 television. All All right, Ashley, we went searching, we went digging. I think we may have found some gold here. What do you think?
I think we have found some gold here, Earl. I'm really fascinated by what you said about Norton. How could he have done more good for the Aboriginals by being an ally versus forsaking his heritage and upbringing to join them? That was not something I'd considered in this episode. I can certainly relate to being someone who doesn't fit in and is, for want of better terminology, trying desperately to find her tribe. Finding the place where I do fit in. And I feel pretty fortunate that I, even while I felt like a pretty big misfit in a lot of ways in my own upbringing, and I talked about this in my very first episode of Gene-ology back in Ella West. I've never fit stereotypical, girl traits. I don't enjoy doing those things for the most part. I grew up in an area where that was confusing at best, or frowned upon at worst. And so I have a lot of empathy for a guy like Norton who just can't seem to find acceptance in his family. And it doesn't feel like maybe they've totally rejected him, because they're at least asking, hey, where is he? Or there's suspicion that he might not actually be dead. Is it possible that, they want him back into the fold because he is part of the family, and while they're not necessarily supportive of him, they're also not outright rejecting him either? It's a weird place to be, and yet I feel all of that because, the things I was into and interested in growing up, I felt like my parents weren't unsupportive, but they weren't actually supportive either. So, it's a weird line to walk. And yet that's how I can see it. Having him walk that line and be like a mediator between the tribe and a white, and him being a white guy, that's something I hadn't considered. Now, him putting on blackface and all of that to be perceived as one of them, but he's got the lighter hair, so it's a giveaway. There's a lot in here to really unpack with that. I can sympathize with him wanting to find a spot to fit in and a place to be where he's accepted. But at the same time, he's still, for want of better terminology, he's putting on a mask. And I can think of maybe a very practical part of that being a very pale person myself. I can't imagine existing in the desert of Australia because I'm going to have skin cancer in 3 seconds. Maybe there's some practical application of whatever he's using to make himself appear more like, his cousins, I guess is what he calls them. He's like, my cousin will lead you back, is what he says at the end of the episode. I'm going to assume that's not a cousin that he actually shares DNA with.
Well, we're not all that different from one another.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes me wonder if this is a character I really want to revisit down the road. Now, spoiler, he never shows up in Whiplash again.
Mm-hmm.
But I really kind of would like to have heard some dialogue hinting at a possible future where once he's past his immediate trauma,
mm-hmm.
once he has found his footing and he is assured that he can walk in both worlds, think of the good he could do there. Mm-hmm. Because right now it just seems like he is kind of playing dress up in a questionable way. it's a very modern thing to ask of a show that's 65 years old.
Right.
But it just seems like, they're walking right up to the edge of something really interesting here and whiff the ball.
Yeah. I'm not really sure what to do with this one. I think there's some good to be mined here of let people be who they want to be and leave them alone. Yeah, you can definitely read the episode in that way, because that seems to be the ultimate conclusion that, yeah, Teddy Bear Norton is dead.
Uh-huh.
Because Norton has put down that identity and is now doing his own thing over here, and you need to leave him alone. And I like oh, by the way, did you hear anything about Dutchman's Reef? I'm like, well, screw you, lady. The way, like you said, the line change takes her from a sympathetic character who was looking to find her son versus, hey, I didn't actually care about him. By the way, did you find a big gold mine that you'd be willing to tell me about?
Yeah, and I really feel that leads us to another message that's baked into the episode here about found family.
Mm-hmm.
Because Norton Colbert could not stand life with his mother and his sister and his brother. By the end of the episode, you totally understand why.
Yeah.
Because they are made out to be just this side of irredeemable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, whatever his justification for leaving that life behind is, and yes, acknowledging that, we have a lot of questions about, is he doing what is best for everyone involved here in his role with the tribe? Or is this a gigantic billboard for cultural appropriation long before the term had been invented? Whatever's going on there, you still can't deny, it is really easy to understand why he doesn't want to stay at home and be Teddy Bear anymore. And, as far as letting people being their authentic selves, it does not make anyone's life worse to let other people be their true selves. And if there's a message we really need drilled into a lot of people's heads in 2025, there it is right there. But I still fixated on one other line. And again, it was a line that changed drastically between script and show. Out here, life is simple. We share everything. Without that, nobody lives. Now, if that's not a distant precursor to the Star Trek future in a Gene Roddenberry script from 1960, I don't know what that would even look like.
That definitely caught my ear as well. Because, especially when you consider where Norton is coming from. His family is very well off, very wealthy. They're elite. And based on everything that we've learned thus far, just from watching the episode, let alone the script, they don't seem to be folks that really care that much about people outside their own.
Yeah, they did not get where they were by exhibiting any kind of compassion or care for others. If we are willing to very quickly dismiss this conversation about, is my son dead? And, oh, by the way, did you find some gold?
Yeah.
If she's doing this to her son, I can't imagine how she treats her employees.
Yeah, no, forget it. Expendable. Keeping that in mind, I can totally see why Norton would embrace that idea of, hey, everything we get is for everyone. We support each other. That's something he's never experienced.
Yeah, and he apparently feels it is essential to live that way.
Mm-hmm.
So I really feel like he is railing against his upbringing.
Mm-hmm.
And is not approving of his family's lifestyle and the way they've treated others. He's undoubtedly seen some stuff.
Yeah.
And you don't even have to put it into the script.
Right.
And to know that he's probably seen some stuff and it just ran completely counter to his personal values.
Right.
And if that is civilization, then let's knock civilization in the head and go live in the outback.
There's a saying about you take care of your circle. Some people don't want to allow their circle to get bigger, or to allow their circle to include everyone that they come into contact with. I think, like, the world has problems that feel insurmountable, especially if you're just one person. What can I do? What can I do? Well, I can clean my corner and I can care for my circle. The challenge needs to be, the posture also needs to be that my circle can always widen. And I think here you have the Colberts who have their circle, but it's not getting any bigger. That circle here is getting smaller.
Yeah.
And
they're okay with that.
And they're okay with that. That's fine. They're taking care of their own. They have the ability to take care of others, the resources to do so. And I mean, from what we're given here, they're probably not doing that. Based on Norton's reaction to them and choosing to reside with the Aboriginals who do. And they are the ones who have widened their circle to include him. Then yeah, you can definitely see there's a whole reason why he ended up there and why he's chosen that over a life of apparent wealth and comfort. Special thanks to our Roddenberry repertory players. Our cast this week featured Bo Nicholson as Dan Ledward and Norman Lau as Christopher Cobb. Gene-ology is meant to be entertaining and informative, but it's also just the beginning of an ongoing conversation about the works of Gene Roddenberry. Drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com and join us on Facebook at missionlogpod. And please remember, your comments could be used on future installments of Gene-ology. If you have any material that might be of interest to us that isn't already in the Roddenberry archive, please drop us a line at missionlog@roddenberry.com. Our website is missionlogpodcast.com, and Missionlog Gene-ology is produced by Roddenberry Entertainment. On the next Gene-ology, actress.
Special thanks to consulting producers Matt Esposito, Homer Frizzell, Rand Hurl, Tom Kozak, Julie Miller, Mike Richards, Mike Shabel, Paul Shadwell, and David Takechi.
Back next week with more of your favorite programs. This concludes our broadcast day.
This is a Roddenberry podcast. For more great podcasts, visit podcast.roddenberry.com.